please raise your questions, if any, comments succinctly. There's a microphone which will reach you when you raise your hand. Yeah, we have the first hand up here. Raise your hand and wave frantically that you haven't caught my eye, so that I will not. Here, I think the lady here was the one. All right. Shall I just go by whom I notice first? All right, because this, the second row here. And then we'll come to you, sir.
Greetings to the panel. My name is Aarti Krishnan. And my question is, there are institutions like The Onion that produce satirical content in news format. So do you think a majority of news consumers are able to differentiate between actual news and what is actually satire?
I think probably a majority of American news consumers are able to distinguish satire from responsible journalism. But even a small percentage of people who take satirical websites seriously are an unhealthy thing for American democracy. I fully support the right of anyone to engage in satire. There was a very popular television show in the 1960s during the Vietnam War. It was a comedy satire television show, a national broadcast in the United States called the Smothers Brothers. And every week they took on the Vietnam War and the controversies surrounding it. And due to, in large part, pressure from President Lyndon Johnson at that time and his supporters, the network that broadcast that show canceled it. And it was one of the darkest days, in my personal opinion, and in my lifetime, it was one of the darkest days for democracy when that occurred. Not that at that very young age I had a position on the Vietnam War. I was extremely young at the time. But I was old enough to know, wait a minute, they just took this TV show off the air because they dared to speak truth, or their perceived truth to the President of the United States, and dared to disagree with him publicly. So satire has a very important place in the fabric of American society and its democracy. Unfortunately, we as journalists sometimes have to help the public understand what is satire and what isn't. There's not the degree of media literacy there should be.
Sure.
I want to add one thing, because I have dealt with this issue so many times on alt news. So in India, the problem is with news literacy. We have very little news literacy. So not only people don't understand satire, the journalists don't understand satire either. So
that's a problem.
Politicians don't.
So there was a satirical piece about how a man went to a Pakistani mosque, and because he farted in the mosque, he was beheaded. This was in some satirical, some outlet, which clearly said that this is a piece of satire. At least 3 Gujarati newspapers printed that in their print, that a man was beheaded because he farted in a mosque. More recently, I don't know how many of you have seen this, but it was said that some religious leader in Saudi Arabia has said that, has issued a fatwa that men can eat their wives if hungry. How many of you have seen that? Right? Who all published it? India Today published it. I can name 3-4 organizations, mainstream organizations, which published it. And not just the issue is not just with satire. There was a debate around Arundhati, some of you might remember, that Paresh Rawal had tweeted that Arundhati Roy should be, this was after the incident of using a human shield in Kashmir, where a man was made to sit on a bonnet in Kashmir, and he was taken around a few kilometers to shield, with the claim that the army was shielding themselves from stone pelters. And then, I think a couple of days later, Paresh Rawal tweeted, because there was a claim on social media that Arundhati Roy had said that Pakistani army can never beat Indian army or something like that. And this is a statement she has made on record when she had gone to Kashmir. Paresh Rawal tweeted that it should be Arundhati Roy who should have been sitting on that bonnet, and not this guy. Now, this issue was discussed on every mainstream media channel. When it was tracked back, it was found that it originated from a website called timesofislamabad.com, and which had absolutely no, they just put out anything. It's like a fake news website based in Pakistan, which puts out sort of a lot of disinformation, and it was complete fake news, and which entire media discussed. So that is, it is not just, citizens don't understand, even journalists don't understand. And I want to give another example, which has got nothing to do with citizens or journalists, but how effective, the issue of news literacy. So one day on Twitter, this was about a couple of years ago, there was a trend which said, "I support Rohit Sardana." Rohit Sardana is now with Aaj Tak, was previously with Z News. And it was claimed that there are some 150 fatwas which have been issued against Rohit Sardana. And it trended all day, thousands of tweets. At the end of the day, Rohit Sardana came and said that no fatwa has been issued against me, and this is completely false. But even though media did not cover it, but everybody on social media knew that there are some 150 fatwas which have been issued against Rohit Sardana. So I went and backtracked, where this information initially came from, and I found this small website called newspur.com or something like that. I wrote a story. So I found the person who was running that website, found the Facebook profile, one really young looking guy, and there was a screenshot on his Facebook profile which stated that he had gotten 18,000 rupees in advertising money. So I wrote a story that this is where the misinformation started from, and I left it at that. Next day, I get a WhatsApp from an anonymous number saying that, "Bhaiya, main wahi hu jisne story likha tha." And he stated, "First of all, you're wrong on facts. I don't make 18,000, I make 40,000 a month." And then he said that he's studying in 12th standard. He lives in Ranchi in a hostel. Now, 40,000 is much more than any, local reporter makes. He makes 40,000, was making 40,000 a month. And he said that my father is a farm help in a village near Ranchi, and he earns 6,000 rupees per month. And I do this so that I can support my education. He had a certain ideology, I won't go into that, but he had a very clear understanding. He stated this to me, that if I publish something real, nobody reads. But look how many people are talking about what I have published yesterday. So even somebody who was in 12th standard had a complete clear understanding of how information travels in India, and how in India we are unable to see what is true and what is untrue. So there's a huge news literacy issue that we have in this country.
Did you want to say something? Or
I could. Since you asked about Onion, I hope you go back and look at the 2012 files of Onion, when they called the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as the sexiest man alive. Well, you asked if people fall for it. The People's Daily of China fell for it. And they ran a 55-page feature saying this is the sexiest man alive. Okay, so people do fall for it. But let me come to this point quickly. Most of you are in the 22 to 25-year age band. Orson Welles, the man who directed what is considered to be the greatest film ever made in Hollywood, Citizen Kane, when he was 23 years of age, ran a spoof on a radio station in the 1940s of Martians landing in the United States, and it created havoc, and he was 23 years of age. So I think people do fall for it, but to take this Onion example forward, in the United States, 10 years ago, we discussed how Jon Stewart was the primary source of news for young people like you, for the millennials, because they were not watching regular cable news or reading newspapers. So satire has become a source of news, and I think the day Cyrus Brocha closes down his show is the day formal emergency will have been declared.
Right. So now we'll take 2 or 3 questions at a time, so that there's no pause. Yes.
Hi, my name is Kabir Ahmed. I am a journalist. My question is to Krishna Prasad sir. You ran a story in 2016 which literally took away your job. this can happen to you, it can happen to anyone. Like, what is the guarantee for a reporter if he goes out on the field and reports something, and when the institution, when your own concern doesn't back it? So what happens there?
Right. One more and then we'll get to responses. Somebody here? Yeah, right. I'm trying to make it even gender-wise.
Hi, sir. I really enjoyed the panel. My question has to do with news online. With news largely being curated, sir, does that increase the chances of disinformation? And also with the direction that we're moving towards, especially online, with news being curated, where does, sir, you spoke about responsible journalism. Where do the wires cross between, curated news and responsible journalism? How is that practiced?
Right. What happened to you in 2016?
Well, thank you, Shabir, for that question. I think that's the real difference between a good editor and a bad editor. A bad editor will always abandon his reporters. A good editor will always stand by his reporter. And I think reporters should have that cushion. Unless you have, this is really an issue of leadership. I have said this n number of times in this in various places. Indian journalism rots from the top, not from the bottom. I think our reporters are first class. Young people like you coming into the profession are first class. I think our journalism rots from the top, which means basically you don't have editors who have the spine, the courage, or the drive to stand by reporters. I have not revealed 99% of the stuff that happened to me. I will do so at some point of time, but I stood by my reporter when it came to the crunch, and I will always stand by a reporter regardless. And I pray to God that all of you get reporters, editors who stand by you, okay? But to come to this question on what happened between reporting and curating, I think it's a very good question. I think part of the problem we have today is this. Journalism has become such a low-cost operation for most news organizations that they think that sitting at the desk and filching stuff from here and there and writing a report is journalism. That is not journalism. I can tell you that there's a prominent newspaper in this country, in English, in the top 5 in the IRS rankings, which discourages journalists from going out of the office. Can you believe that? One of the top 5 newspapers in the English language discourages journalists from going out of the office to do stories. They want it to be all done on the phone. So therefore, this thing that has happened is that while Indian newspaper or media profits shoot up, their investment in journalism is going down or is stagnant or kind of wobbly. So I think that's the thing that has happened, which is you're not investing enough in journalism.
Thank you all for a great discussion. So you had mentioned, and I would agree, the importance of standing behind and beside your reporters. I want to ask you, someone had mentioned Der Spiegel, and back in December there was a 23-page special that Der Spiegel did about one of his reporters, who resigned after admitting to making up stories over a long period of time. In the United States also we see reporters who were removed from their positions because of false information. So I want to know where you, and also Dan, where would you say is that, is there a need for more, reprisal against people who, reporters and editors who publish fake news? And that within the Indian context that can be tricky, I know, because of sedition clauses or different things. But so first is the question about reprisal, and then what is the balance there in terms of also supporting?
Good afternoon to the panel. The question that I'd like to ask is with bigger technological platforms like Facebook or WhatsApp, basically Facebook, that is controlling the entire way news functions. So for instance, if you take at the peak of the Kashmir issue, while Article 370 and the lockdown was ongoing, Swaraj's death unfortunately took place. And we saw the way the hashtag trends changed. Every news organization started speaking only about Swaraj for one particular day, and then the cycle went back. So how, as media organizations, while we are in the midst of reporting or filing our stories or whatever, how do we not fall into the cycle that this bigger technology holds against us? Because it's sometimes close to impossible to put out a story and then to watch it fail because it's not trending. And it's mostly what I notice is that we as journalists, like to all the budding journalists here, you are going to start filing stories based on the trendings or based on the hashtags that are out there. So I really don't know how to handle this or how to tackle this. So that's one question.
Great, so let's give a round of answers first. First one about standing by your reporter, Der Spiegel example, what happens?
Yeah, this is a fantastic case Ms. Lovelace is talking about. I hope you guys are aware of this. Der Spiegel, one of the world's greatest magazines, one of the more authenticated magazines, which had so many fact checkers. Their star correspondent was discovered to have concocted, I think, 16 out of 64 stories. 16 out of 64 stories. So I think that's a very, very big black mark against Der Spiegel. But the only answer I can give for this, I mean, I can give you one other example. Stern, S-T-E-R-N, Stern is another great German magazine. They printed the Hitler diaries in the late 1980s, and they printed those diaries claiming that they had fact-checked those diaries with the world's greatest Hitler scholars, and that they had authenticated those diaries and published those diaries. It was proven to be fake. Both in the case of Stern and in the case of Der Spiegel, as an editor, this is the only answer I can give you, which is that journalism is one of the most human enterprises on earth. What comes out in a newspaper or a magazine or a TV station is a very human effort. Error is inbuilt in this whole exercise. It's not like making a Mercedes-Benz car. Whether you work on it or somebody else works on it, the same car comes out. But in the case of a journalism product, it's totally different depending on person to person. And we as editors, we as owners, we as people generally tend to trust. The only thing I can say in response to both Der Spiegel and Stern is that the trust of the editors or the owners was broken. Somebody took them for a ride is the only answer I can give. As for the third question, I think that's a really brilliant question because that is the elephant in this room, which we have not addressed so far. What is the role of these technology majors, what we call the FANG companies, FANG, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google? What is the role of these FANG companies in this whole disinformation process? I think it is huge. I am saying this not now because of the evidence that Americans have placed before us. I have believed since 2013 that there was a very serious effort to subvert India's democracy, and I think I have been proven right by whatever has happened in 2016 in the United States and further on in India and so on and so forth. But I think we must address this question. What is it that we can do as citizens to ensure that these companies open up? These companies have become too large for their own good. Some of them are bigger than some small countries in terms of GDP. Okay? So I think we need to open up. I think we need to look at the algorithms of these companies. We need to look at the revenues of these companies. In spite of my saying so in the presence of Americans here, we need to look at it because there is something truly dubious about the role of Facebook in India's democracy. Something truly dubious about the role of Twitter and YouTube and Google. Their coziness with government is something we must question. I think we must do this. Imagine this. Imagine this. Last week, Kashmir for 14 days has been shut. Can you imagine a hashtag like Kashmir backs Modi trending on Twitter? Can you give me a reason why it's trending? If Kashmir is blacked out, if Kashmiris can't access the internet, how the hell is this trend trending? We must ask these questions of so many things done by these guys. We must go back to the early part of the 20th century when the telephone companies in the United States were very, very big. There was a company called Bell Laboratories which was one of the world's largest telephone companies. Because of the antitrust laws at that point of time, Bell was broken down into what was called baby bells. My question before you is, should we start thinking of breaking up these companies into smaller things so that they don't distort democracies around the world? Let me leave you this one thought. Freedom House is one of the world's leading think tanks. Out of 65 elections in 2017, out of 65 elections, Freedom House found that 18 elections, which means nearly 1/4 of those elections, had been tampered with by these technology companies. That's something you should be thinking about. Because at the end of the day, beyond all this, it's about our democracy, about our rights, about the rights of our minorities, above all, about the most marginalized people.
I want to add something.
We're running out of time. I'm going to ask Prateek and Dan to give their reflections on these issues, and then we'll have to wind up.
I want to talk something about the technology companies because I've been dealing with them on a regular basis, and it is a very, very important issue. But the first question that needs to be raised is that how many heads of states has Facebook allowed to come into their, go to their headquarters and then, cry, literally? How many heads of states have been given that kind of an audience? And why was Mr. Modi given that kind of audience in the Facebook headquarters? That is the first question that needs to be raised. There are, just yesterday there's news of Facebook and Twitter taking down disinformation campaigns arising out of China, targeting the Hong Kong protesters. This is the news this morning, okay? And in India, we have no dearth of disinformation propagators. But why is this preferential treatment? Is that because, it is favorable for, as such, the America, that there are protests that are happening in Hong Kong, which is why the Chinese disinformation systems were brought down. But why is that there's a huge disinformation system in India, and we have written articles after articles about how they have put out dangerous misinformation which can lead to riots, and it has led to riots, but they have not been taken down. So there is, about 2 months ago, there was an article about how there are disinformation systems arising out of Iran, which was targeting USA. They were taken down. So there is a clear bias here as to what sort of disinformation systems will be taken down and what sort of disinformation systems won't be taken down, and there is no transparency as far as the policies is concerned. So the point that has been brought up is extremely important, and that is where my whole the shift from an engineering career to software career was that there's very little transparency in these big corporates. And for example, we come up with an app which, there's a very simple thing. You feed it you go to the Android app store, you look for alt news, you'll find an app. You give it an image or a video, and I just demoed this app earlier, and it will give you a fact check corresponding to an image or video. Now we are in a day and age where you have n number of ways of consuming information. Each one of these corporations, they have invested a lot of money in how you can consume information, but there's not a single app which will let you upload an image or video. And they have all the money, all the tech in the world, all the support in the world to create such applications, but there is not a single app in either Android Play Store or iOS Play Store which can let you upload an image and video and tell you that, look, this is the actual fact of the story. Something as simple as that, something as basic as that, where you can authenticate the information that you receive. We don't have that. So that is where these questions need to be raised.
I will just say briefly in conclusion, again, it's been my honor to be here, and thank you so much for indulging me on the panel this afternoon. RTDNA has no position about whether the social media network should be broken up or regulated or whatever. We're a press freedom organization. We don't get into the business or business decisions of government other than how it relates directly to a free press and journalism. To your question about what news organizations should do when they discover a reporter has knowingly fabricated information. Well, when that occurs, the news organization has only one option, and that is to come clean with its readers, viewers, listeners, whatever, users online, to terminate the employment of that individual, and to be 100% transparent about how the errors occurred, how the errors were discovered, how those responsible were held accountable for those errors, and what steps are being taken to rectify any harm that was done by those false stories, period. There's no other acceptable answer.
Thank you. So there you were, and one might add, the US also had its share of errant reporter alert. I think Judith Miller and the New York Times, of course, New York Times removed her from service and on coverage of the Iraq wars, the Iraq invasion. A lot of inaccuracies came to light. At the end of the day, the concept of speaking truth to power, as Dan mentioned, that is a virtual presence in the room, because that's what journalism is all about. But here we in India, if you do a reality check, perhaps what Pratik's point about, rather than, okay, if you don't speak truth to power, at least don't silence the truths that come along, you know. So that seems to be a function of journalism, to not recognize things, to silence issues, to evade what should be out there. So we are in a peculiar situation where, as I think it is a Russian poet Yevtushenko said, when truth is replaced by silence, that silence is a lie. And therefore, are we purveyors of truth? No. Are we purveyors of lie? That's a question before us. Thank you very much.